Hello, everybody. I'm humbled to share with you some reflections and understandings of some trends that I've been tracking for the last 5 years as researcher and designer. My intention in this presentation is actually not to give you tips and tricks for creating the next big thing, but actually trying to offer a contemplative approach to what's happening and, most important, what's coming, according to researchers, futurologists, early adopters, and creative leaders, who can inspire us to meet reality as it is and co-create the church, the humanity, and the planet of the future. That's why I hope this encounter might be more than a presentation, a calling at the end of this, almost at the end of this Congress, for you and me to rediscover the creative prophets within, capable of imagining possibilities for change and liberation. So I will start sharing some key attitudes for 2023 and 2024. For me, it's always interesting to share insights from creative industries because some of these industries are way beyond faster and much more agile than the church. When you see your ministries, your parishes, I know the reality at least in my country and in the context I work with. But it's interesting how we want to throw the network to make this evangelization. But we always found resource and seek for resources and inspiration only within the church most of the time. Now this new narrative that we are exploring and pushing, and I know many other efforts are happening, can help us to open this contemplative gaze to what's happening outside. From the laboratory I work with, our word for 2023 is nostalgia. And the color we're proposing for 2023 is heritage blue. As seen in many runways, the fashion shows from the capitals of the world, but also fairs from furniture, graphic designers, and even artists that are taking this narrative of nostalgia and this main color. Something that is interesting is that the worst thing that would happen after this presentation or this calling is that many brands or many efforts within SIGNIS turn blue. That's not my intention. The idea here is to take these values that go with nostalgia to explore what we can create in a much more conceptual way. So, following the values of the past years, since 2018, 19, 20, of course the pandemic, we are coming to a point of loyalty, longing for abundance and home, thinking this idea of futures or maybe past with better realities. It's a time for dreaming, a time for looking for peace, decolonization, honesty, and so on. I found this long quote from a Jesuit priest, Benjamin González Vuelta, and he says, you can read it there, that maybe we can go as a church beyond nostalgia. And instead of suffering or complaining or repeating the messages that our younger generations doesn't want to come to the church and repeating these messages that we have heard a lot, we can really embrace poverty and the idea of turning intentionally into minorities, receiving faith as a humble light for new perspective. I remember a really good, one message, very prophetic message from Pope Benedict XVI that says that the church of the future is totally a minority, in the beginning. Then I will jump into the second trend, looking at this wave of how the progression of optimism has been going through this past year. Before the pandemic, we had this sober optimism because anything was flowing in a kind of normal way. But then all these things happened, and the search for radical optimism was something that even Pantone, the lead laboratory of color, proposed with the yellow and with the gray as a response of resilience and trying to feeling attached to a hope in the future. Then, during this year, many experts propose boundless optimism, and it's interesting how, for example, in the fashion industry, Pier Paolo Piccioli from Valentino proposed a color scheme very disruptive, like saying that we can find dopamine colors for uplifting the soul in the streets. But then they realized, or he realized, that narrative was also kind of silly, you know, like only trusting in colors for changing the reality is something that is not powerful enough. So we are coming to a point of realistic optimistic. And for me, the key point for understanding what does it mean, realistic optimistic, optimism is the ability to coexist and to understand that death is walking near us, and many realities that are complete adverse and maybe disruptive for what we know until this point of our journey can be drastical and different. This image that I'm sharing here is an example, a real example of experimental underwater greenhouses for growing food in Italy. The first time I saw this, I thought it was a render or something in the metaverse, but no, it's happening. And this reconciliation with reality, as it is, as Pope Francis said in the last message of communication last year, is something that we are moving forward and becoming much more peaceful with that idea. As I mentioned, the coexistence is a key word for understanding realistic optimism. This example is the Black Chapel in London. It's a contemplative space with minimalistic art that some hours of the day and some days, it allows participants to make liturgical celebrations, but in other hours of the week or the day, it only shares like these exhibitions of art and silence, like reducing elements of Catholic imaginary and other religions to make this a space for everybody. The descriptions from the architects, it was beautiful for me that they got inspiration from different religious contexts and not only from a Christian way of sharing faith. And this simple and very minimalistic space can help us to understand how the construction can look like in architecture. Then maybe this one I will share it very fast because we cannot talk about caring for the common home without talking about inclusion. And the next wave of inclusion, for me, it's not something only trendy or something that we need to do. It's really a reflection, and as Saul mentioned, a process of deschooling, of understanding how the real inclusion from Jesus' style need to be embraced in our church. I love this quote, stories are so important. If they weren't, you wouldn't see people trying to ban them. As you know, in many countries, realities, not only from the LGBT community, but also indigenous communities, black people and so on, are still marginalized. So I think we as communicators, we need to embrace more and more this calling for telling stories, real stories, and not only following like these waves, but really touching reality as it is. I will jump this one. And maybe this was, for me, the most exciting part, how much minutes I have, okay? Thank you. Well, since 2018, the regenerative concept was rising and appearing as a response of a new narrative regarding a sustainable topic. For me, in a few words, regenerative culture means giving more than what you take. Because we are coming to a part in the story in which sustainability gives us like an input of sustaining, of course, something, like taking care of something. But in this moment, going back to the first presentation, if you see the numbers, there's nothing more to sustain. Like the system is broken. So the attitude we need to embrace is more about healing. So with regenerative culture, I would like to suggest some ideas, quick ideas of how can we translate this into the different fields and the different areas we are working with. For example, we have the chance to talk about regenerative communication. design, searching for materials, new styles of presenting exhibitions, new styles of creating experiences, not only physical products. I saw this campaign in the right there about plants right movement. And this maybe sounds weird, but there's an entire movement, as you maybe know, like reframing the rights and the presence of these co-living beings with us. Of course, we can talk about regenerative films. Maybe many people here are more experts in films than me. But when we talk about the possibility of entertainment for regenerative like souls and ways of contemplating reality, I love this one from, I think it's 2020 or 2021, La Vita davanti a sé in Netflix. It shares the story of migrants in Italy that doesn't have family, but only a transgender woman, an ex-prostitute, and a refugee kid from Africa. They only have themselves, and it's interesting how the story guides you to a regenerative family that can really reframe what we understand as family, as peace, and healing. I'm sharing the ebook Unfold Nest as an example of regenerative education, not only because I participated on it, but really because the experience of the construction and sharing like other kind of possibilities, not only for Catholics, but also for Buddhists, for Hindus, and for people even that doesn't believe in divinity, is a challenge that we need to embrace to really think about other styles, other aesthetics, other ways of sharing photographies, and so on. If we talk about regenerative, we can also talk about fashion and how this industry that is maybe one of the most, how do you say, like overconsumption, is always generating trash and trash. They are really reconsidering the hegemonic aesthetics they are presenting, the materials they're using, so on. We can talk about spaces, we can talk about communities, we can talk about economies. I would love to share this video, but I think I don't have much more time. It's just a platform of cryptocurrency that instead of building more power or like regions only for a few, you can fund projects, regenerative projects in local communities in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. And with this currency, if it increases, you can directly support and be in touch with the creators of this project. It's totally for free, without commissions, and it's really interesting how it works. We can talk about, of course, regenerative leadership as a trend. And I would like to ask if our spirituality can become regenerative too. As a conclusion, I would say regeneration as a new value, as a new narrative, as a new attitude for 2023 and beyond, because this is not only for a year. Of course, we can think it as something slow, sober, fragile, silent, uncomfortable, necessary, healing, traditional, but dynamic. And so it is the future. So if you are finding or looking for some key words, key trends, key movements, key dynamism for activate your next communication project, maybe regenerative culture can be something important that you might consider. And last but not least, in the encyclical Laudato Si, as you know, a text is collected as a challenge to our creativity. As never before in history, common destiny beckons us to seek a new beginning. Let ours be a time remembered for the awakening of a new reverence for life, the firm resolve to achieve sustainability, that quickening of the struggle for justice and peace, and the joyful celebration of life. I would like you to kindly stand up just for a minute, half of a minute, just to do a small exercise. Please stand up. This calling say that our time, our generation, can be remembered as a time for awakening. I would like to end this calling, as I mentioned at the beginning, not only as a presentation, but a moment of encounter to reconnect with our creative prophet. Just to close your eyes for a second. Take a deep breath. And listen what is alive in your body. try to listen or to feel. Is there a joy? Is there a pain? If you are tired, to recognize it, to feel it, and with your breathing, regenerate the communication within so that you can reconnect and regenerate communication with the world. Thank you so much.